Good evening. I just want to spend a few minutes and chat with you about three things: the past, the present, and the future. Start with the past. About 25 years ago, Intel came to Ireland. On average, I think it's been a pretty good deal for both sides. There's been mostly ups and a few downs. Another aspect about the past was 50 years ago. 50 years ago. How many of you are over 50 in this audience? I'd ask you to stand up. That might be difficult. 50 years ago, a gentleman by the name of Gordon Moore wrote an article for a magazine called Electronics in the United States, and it was about a nascent, new formed industry, the integrated circuit industry. And in that article, Gordon, in his good engineering background, made a few projections. And at that point in time, and by the way, an integrated circuit had maybe 50 or 60 transistors in it. And he was projecting the future. And he said, isn't it interesting that every year or so, the number of transistors doubles? And over a period of time, that observation from 1965 became Moore's Law. And it's relatively interesting that after 50 years, Moore's Law is still alive and kicking and performing in about the same fashion. And in 1965, there were roughly 50 or so transistors in the integrated circuit. When I joined Intel Corporation in 1973, the main product was something called the 1103, which was a 1024-bit dynamic RAM that had replaced core memory in computers. And interestingly enough, Moore's Law, which is an empirical observation, not a real physical law, has been the driving force for, I think, most of the change we've seen in the last 50 years. It's really allowed computers to be personalized, cell phones to be made increasingly more powerful, people to communicate with each other everywhere around the world through communication devices. It's really changed the world dramatically. If I go back probably 100 years in time, that's the last time Ireland beat the All Blacks in soccer. Or rugby. You know, football in the United States makes it confusing when you talk about these things. But I want to make sure that you understand that Moore's Law is still alive and you still haven't beat the All Blacks in the last 100 years. The interesting thing about the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Moore's Law was that it brought out the usual press response, which was that Moore's Law is ended. We've reached the physical limits of transistors. You can't make them any smaller. You can't continue to double the number of transistors each year. You can't double the number of memory devices on a memory chip each year. Innovation is going to stop because Moore's Law is going to stop. I'd like to, kind of analyze that for a moment for you. But before I do that, I'd like to just remind you of what has happened in the last 50 years. We've seen new industries develop, computer industry, not the mainframe industry, but the computer industry. The communications industry, not Bell Telephone, but the communications industry we have today. Our ability to communicate with each other anywhere, anytime, access information anywhere, anytime. We've seen the disappearance of companies which were stalwarts before that time. The mainframe computer manufacturing companies, only IBM remains, basically, but only a shell of their former self in the hardware sides. IBM is basically a software service company today. All the other mainframe computer companies have disappeared. Even along the way, companies which were not mainframe computer companies, many computer companies like Digital Equipment Corporation have disappeared. Mainstream personal computer companies like Compaq, Gateway, and others have disappeared. Communication companies 25 or 30 years ago, Motorola was the premier communications company in the world. It's basically disappeared. 5 years ago, interestingly, a Finnish company, Nokia, was the premier communication company in the world. They've essentially disappeared from that space. Apple died and was resurrected by the brilliance of Steve Jobs. We've seen a tremendous turnover in industries in the last 25 to 50 years. And my projection is we're going to see that continued change going forward. But let me go back to a minute to the press and their response to Gordon Moore's 50th anniversary of Moore's Law. They claim Moore's Law is dead. You can't make transistors smaller anymore. It's interesting if you look at the last 25 or 30 years, roughly every 5 years, Moore's Law was declared dead for one reason or another. When I joined the company in the early 70s, Moore's Law was going to die because very simply you created these integrated circuits using photolithography techniques. You couldn't image anything smaller than the wavelength of the light you were using, which meant 1 micron was effectively the limit of projection of an image that you could create on an integrated circuit. And therefore, you couldn't make anything smaller than 1 micron. There are a lot of smart engineers in the integrated circuit business. Today, they're printing circuits with dimensions of 10 nanometers. If you have trouble converting between microns and inches and feet and nanometers, 10 nanometers is 100 times smaller than 1 micron. So somehow those smart engineers figured out how to create images 100 times smaller than it was theoretically impossible. So that objection to Moore's Law went away. There was another objection, which was you made transistors smaller. You had to shrink the dielectric between the substrate and the active part of the circuit so you could turn the circuit on and off to be able to make circuits that ran faster and used less power. And when we got down to 1 monolayer of dielectric, 1 monolayer of silicon dioxide, people said, well, obviously you can't go to less than 1 monolayer. And we said, yes, obviously you can't, but we can change the dielectric to go from silicon dioxide to hafnium oxide or some other different dielectric constant and continue to scale Moore's Law down. And on and on and on, every objection, physical objection that was put forward, smart engineers from around the world with a good R&D budget have been able to say, hey, Moore's Law is alive and well and continues. So when the press came out with all of their articles in the last few months saying, Moore's Law is dead again, I objected. I objected on the basis that we, as an industry, still employ thousands of smart engineers who are going to figure out how to continue this technology. And in fact, if you talk to the engineers working on it, they will tell you today that, oh yeah, we have the next 3 or 4 or 5 transistors in the laboratory working to bring them out in high production so we can go from that 1,000-bit memory in the early 70s beyond the billions of bits of memory in an integrated circuit today. So I would contend that Moore's Law is still alive and well because we have those bright engineers who basically don't read the newspaper. They don't understand what they can't do because of popular opinion, and they just do it. And they've been doing it for 30 plus years, and they'll continue to do it in the future. There was also another interesting objection to Moore's Law, why it should be dead, not brought about by the technical community or any one of these technical arguments, but by the financial community. And you have to kind of deal with the semiconductor industry and Moore's Law to understand this a bit. When you create one of these new factories, like our Intel builds in Leeslip or some other place in the world, and you spend $5 billion or a few billion euros, actually it's $5 billion or 5 billion euros today. Reality is finally coming home to roost in Europe. You assign a lifetime to that factory, and you depreciate that factory over its expected lifetime. The expected lifetime is 4 years. It is a ridiculously crazy industry to be in because you make a $5 billion investment and you write off $5 billion linearly over 4 years. So even if you don't use the factory, it costs you $1 billion plus a year to just have it sit there. There's an economic argument which was, if you guys would just slow down, if you guys would just stop a new technology every 2 years, think of how much better return on investment you could get from that factory. If you would just stop the onslaught of technology, if you would stop creating new products, if you would stop bringing new technology into the marketplace to do all the wonderful things that we expect technology to do today, it would be a better financial investment for you. It's lovely to be on the opposite side of that argument, which is to say, technology is a treadmill. If you ever stop on a treadmill, do you know what happens to you? You get thrown off and someone else takes your place. That financial argument has never carried much weight except with the financial community. And if you're ever a CEO in the tech industry, the last thing you want to listen to is the financial community telling you what to do. So we've never paid much attention to that argument. But Moore's Law is not dead. It's not dead for 3 reasons. And the change that is brought, the technology change, the change in company structure in the world, is going to continue. And those 3 reasons are very simply, there are incredibly bright, talented engineers who know how to do things which were thought impossible a few years ago and will continue to do the impossible. Today, when you're making an integrated circuit with billions and billions and billions of transistors that you can't even see with the most powerful optical microscope, people will figure out how to double the number of those transistors in the next 12, 18 months. They know how to do the impossible. They'll continue to do the impossible. And thank God for young engineers that don't read the newspaper. The second reason is very interesting, I believe, which is even if you said for a moment that Moore's Law is dead, what would be the impact? And so if you start to look at communications technology that is available but not distributed worldwide, how many of you would like to have 10 or 20 gigabits delivered to your house in bandwidth? And that's capable but not available today. If you look at the most powerful computers in the world built on today's technology, they might run at 10 or 20 petaflops. How many people know what a petaflop is? Sounds like a pornographic term, actually. Petaflop is 10 to the 15th floating operations per second. It's a whole lot of calculations per second, 10 to the 15th. There are already blueprints for computers that'll run at an exaflop, which is 10 to the 18th floating point instructions per second. 100 or 1,000-fold increase from the most powerful computers today. So even if you stop technology today, just looking down a few years in advance, you're going to see 100 or 1,000-fold improvement in the maximum computer capability that's available. And you have communications capability that is not distributed. So that's going to continue. So, even if Moore's Law were to die, which it's not, you still have that to look forward to, which I think is kind of exciting. Now, the third reason why any talk about Moore's Law dying, I think, is premature and not appropriate, is if you look at the application of technology to changing the business structure of the world, you see phenomenal changes. We all know what the internet has done. instantaneous communication, information delivery everywhere. But other things that the internet has done. The most powerful content company in the world is a company that doesn't own any content. It's called Facebook. Facebook owns no content, but it is the most powerful content company in the world. The most powerful taxi company in the world is somebody called Uber, who doesn't own a single taxi, but is revolutionizing the taxi industry around the world. Probably the most powerful retailer in the world is a Chinese company called Alibaba. Deals more retail content than anybody else and doesn't own any inventory. You can go on and on. You can talk about the company that books more pleasure travel reservations than any company in the world that doesn't own any travel properties. It's a company called Airbnb. Those companies are changing the way commerce is conducted, the way business is conducted. They don't do it without conflict. They don't do it without conflict because they are the industries of the future, and the present doesn't always appreciate the future. In fact, the present always resists the future. The present likes it the way it is. That's why you guys all like food subsidies in Europe. Don't like GMO products and things of that sort because you haven't accepted the future. But that is the future. So I look at what's going on in the world of technology and I say, okay, Moore's Law is 50 years old. It's still alive and kicking. It's got several more generations. Get ready for that. And that's going to bring you even greater technology than if you just took the technology today and dispersed it to its capability, which would blow your mind away. And all that means is that every industry today is going to undergo huge change tomorrow. We talked about several of them today. We talked about the agriculture industry, what happens when you start to apply technology, the ag industry. You can look at the education industry. We had a couple of university presidents today who must be sitting there at night figuring, my God, what is my university going to look like in 10 years? Is it going to be online or in person? What is the mix going to be? How am I going to handle that? You can look at the marriage of biology and engineering, the whole biotech industry. What is all that compute power when you have an excess, 10 to the 18th compute cycles per second in a computer? What are you going to be able to do with genomics, DNA testing, personalized medicine, predicting the future? And then let's just go to the common industries of retail, such. What's going to happen there? So I just see phenomenal change taking place because Moore's Law has got us to where we are and it's still going strong. So what does that mean for Ireland? You know, my only message to you about that tonight is we've been giving the message for 5 or 6 or 7 years, which is get ready for this new world. It's going to continue to come at light speed. Nothing is changing. That change is going to continue. Get ready for it. And how do you get ready for it? You do 3 things. The only 3 things any society in the face of the earth can do. You educate your young people to be able to accommodate that change. They have to be flexible, they have to have skills, they have to have basic knowledge, and they have to be able to solve problems and communicate. If they can't do those 4 things, game over. So an educated workforce is absolutely key. That's the message I've been speaking in Ireland about for 20 years. It's even more important going forward. Second thing, your universities, your research institutions, your institutions of higher learning are absolutely key to your societal future, your economic future. You look at those places in the world that have the strongest local economy, the place that talent gravitates to, the places where new companies are formed. And the two classic examples are Boston, Massachusetts, and Silicon Valley, California. Boston has MIT, Harvard. Silicon Valley has Stanford, my alma mater, and those guys up in Berkeley, the University of California. They contribute a little bit. Stanford does most of the work. But the presence of those major research institutions, world recognized for the basic research that they do, recognized for their interface with industry, and spinning off technologies, ideas that form companies, that form wealth, that grow the economy. That is absolutely critical. So the university presidents that are here tonight, their job is just as important tomorrow as it was yesterday. It's not to be in the top 1,000 of the universities or the top 200. It's to be in the top few of the universities around the world. And the last thing, as a society, as an environment that you have to do, is you have to create an environment which is suitable for the investment in innovation, tax structure, presence of venture capital, rules and regulation, societal attitude towards failure. Very important issue. Startup companies fail 90% of the time. If you have a societal bias against failure, guess what? People don't want to fail. They don't want to take a chance. Go to Silicon Valley, go to Boston. Each failure you've been associated with in your career is a gold star for experience. You've learned something. You'll do better the next time. Failure is a plus, it's not a negative. So societies that want to move forward have to be able to accept and adopt failure as a learning mechanism, as a training mechanism. So the message I want to give you, and I think that the message that ITLG brings you each year when we come, is about the same. Focus on your education system. That is absolutely key. You can be no better than your workforce. Quality of your workforce will determine the quality of your society, the quality of your economic development. There's no shortcut around that. It's hard work. There's no shortcut. You have to continue to invest and work on it. Continue to invest in R&D. There's no shortcut to that. R&D gives you the ideas, the seed corn for the next generation of products, the next generation of companies. That's why John and the other in the ITLG group are so emphatic about looking for entrepreneurs, looking for ideas, even at the teenage level, not at the university level. Get that concept built in. Get that bias built in. And then, as Minister Noonan was telling us today, make sure the rules and the regulations are incentives to invest and not disincentives to invest. Those economies, those societies that invest in innovation will be the ones that are successful. I think Ireland's made tremendous progress over the last 5 years. I want to compliment you all. We all had kind of a big bubble burst in 07, 08 time frame. We all found out that real estate is not the salvation to mankind. I hope that no longer is the primary technical major in the Irish universities construction management, but something other than that. But I think Ireland was one of the few countries in the world that really took that bubble bursting seriously and took the direct actions to improve the situation and continued to invest in Science Foundation Ireland, in basic research, to grow the universities, to grow the entrepreneurial spirit. That is absolutely key. So let me just leave you with the message that there's no free lunch. It's hard work. The future is going to change. The present will resist the future. It always does, but it's forward-looking people's job to present the future in a positive light and drive for the future. I guess I would paraphrase it that Ireland has made great progress. I think you're in good shape to continue to move forward in the future. To put it in local terms, you can probably have your Guinness and drink it too. Thank you.